When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because after all these years, I'd learned that silence hurts less than words. Her voice was calm when she said it. Too calm, the kind of calm that tells you the decision was made long ago. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She just looked tired. "Maybe it's better if you take a little break, Mom," she said softly, hands folded in front of her. "You've been through a lot lately. You deserve your own space." I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, the smell of her morning coffee still in the air, and realized what she really meant. It wasn't about space. It was about me, about not fitting anymore. And for a moment, all I could think was, how did we get here? I never planned to live with them forever. After my husband passed away, my son insisted I move in. "It's too lonely out there, Mom," he'd said. "You'll have your own room. It'll be good for all of us." He was right. For a while it was good. The house felt full again. I cooked breakfast, watered the garden, folded laundry when no one was looking. I tried not to overstep. I wanted to be helpful, not heavy. My daughter-in-law Anna was polite, always polite. She thanked me for dinners, smiled when I offered to babysit their little girl, Emily. But sometimes I caught something in her eyes, hesitation, maybe discomfort. Whenever I touched something that was hers. It started with little things. One day, she quietly rearranged the pantry after I'd organized it. Another time she asked if I could please not use that towel. "It's decorative." I laughed and apologized, though my heart tightened a little each time. Still, I tried to remind myself, this was their home. I was just a guest with memories. The evenings were my favorite. After dinner, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea while the sun went down. Emily would run outside chasing fireflies, and my son Mark would tell me about his work. Sometimes, in those golden moments, I could almost hear my husband's laugh again, deep and steady. He used to say, "Home is wherever you can breathe easy." I breathed easy back then. I remember one night in particular. The air smelled like rain. Emily crawled into my lap, holding a book with a torn cover. "Grandma, can you read me this one?" she asked. I smiled. "Again? You know how it ends." "That's okay," she whispered. "I just like the way you read it. That's what love sounds like, I think. Not loud, not grand. Just quiet moments that remind you you're still needed. But time has a way of changing the air in a house." I began to notice how often Anna sighed when I walked into the room. How she'd redo what I'd already done. Refold towels, rewash dishes, rewrite grocery lists. She never complained, never said a cruel word. But her silence said plenty. Mark didn't notice at first. He was always busy. Calls, meetings, long drives home. He'd kiss my cheek, ask if I'd eaten, then disappear into his office. I told myself not to mind. One morning, I found a note on the fridge in Anna's handwriting, "Please don't make breakfast." "We're trying to eat lighter." I stared at it for a long time, holding the spatula in my hand. The eggs in the pan were already sizzling. I turned off the stove and whispered to myself, "Of course, dear. Lighter." I often walked around the block to clear my mind. There was a neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who'd wave from her garden every morning. She was in her 70s, always wearing a bright scarf and muddy gloves. "Out for your morning stroll again?" she'd call out. I'd nod, smiling. "Just trying to stay useful." She'd laugh. "Honey, being alive is useful enough." Sometimes I'd stop by her gate and talk a little longer than I meant to. She'd tell me about her roses, and I'd tell her about Emily's school play or the new curtains Anna picked. It felt nice to have someone listen without judgment, without the invisible weight of being extra. When I got home after those walks, I'd pass by the family photos on the hallway wall. My favorite was from Mark's wedding day. His arm around Anna, both smiling, full of promise. I was in the background, holding his jacket, not even looking at the camera. I never minded that. I liked being the one behind the smiles. But lately I wondered if that's all I'd ever been. The background. The quiet one holding everyone else's happiness together. Nights grew quieter. Emily started sleeping in her own room more often. Anna worked later. Mark came home tired. I still set the table for 3, even when I knew they'd eat in the living room watching TV. Old habits, I guess. I'd sit at the kitchen table alone, tracing circles on the tablecloth my husband and I bought decades ago. He used to tell me, "You take care of everyone, but who takes care of you?" I never had an answer then. I still don't. One rainy afternoon, I opened an old box in my closet. My husband's letters, still folded neatly, yellowed with time. The top one said, "Don't ever let silence make you small." I smiled through tears. Maybe I'd forgotten how to take my own advice. That night, I made my favorite soup. Not because anyone asked, but because I missed the sound of someone saying, "This tastes wonderful." No one joined me at the table. Still, I didn't complain. I believed love wasn't about being seen all the time. It was about being there quietly, holding the corners of the house together when no one else noticed. But even the strongest hands get tired of holding on. It didn't happen all at once. Things rarely do. Sometimes love doesn't break. It just fades in tiny pieces, so quietly that by the time you notice, there's nothing left to hold. The first time I really felt it was a Sunday morning. I'd woken early, as always, made coffee, and set out plates for breakfast. The smell of toast and eggs filled the kitchen, the kind of smell that used to bring everyone out smiling. But that day, Anna came downstairs, stopped in the doorway, and said gently, "Oh, you didn't have to do that, Mom. We were planning to go out." She smiled politely, but her eyes looked away. I froze, the spatula still in my hand. "Oh, I didn't know. I thought I'd make something warm before church." She nodded, almost apologetically. "That's sweet of you. But Emily already promised pancakes at that diner she likes." I laughed softly, though it came out thinner than I meant. Of course. Pancakes are hard to beat. They left 15 minutes later. I stayed by the window, watching them drive away. The little girl waving from the back seat, the sunlight catching her hair. The smell of eggs lingered in the air. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out, so I sat at the table and ate alone. The silence felt heavy, like it had something to say but didn't know how. It went on like that for weeks. Little things. Always little things. Anna started doing the laundry before I could get to it. She handled the groceries alone. She even began cooking dinner early, as if to save me the trouble. At first, I was grateful. I thought maybe she's just trying to take care of me. But the more she did, the less there was left for me to do, and the smaller I began to feel. One night I walked into the kitchen and found her re-seasoning the soup I'd made. "Oh, it's just a bit salty," she said, not unkindly. I smiled. "You're right. I must be losing my touch." She looked up for a second, maybe to apologize, but the moment passed too quickly. Mark didn't see any of it. He'd come home late, kiss Emily, hug Anna, and tell me, "Thanks for helping out, Mom. You make things easier around here." Easier. That was the word. Not better, not home, just easier. I think he meant it kindly. But some words, even kind ones, can cut deep. One afternoon, I went to the garden to pull weeds. It was my favorite part of the house, quiet, green, full of breath. As I worked, I overheard voices from the open kitchen window. Anna's and Mark's. At first I didn't mean to listen, but their tones made me stop. Mark, we need to talk about your mom, Anna said, her voice low but firm. What about her? He asked. She's always here. Always doing something. I can't breathe sometimes. It feels like I'm a guest in my own home. There was a pause. Mark sighed. She's just trying to help. I know, Anna said. But it's too much. I need space, for us, for Emily. My hand trembled, dirt falling from my gloves. Space. That word again. It's strange how a single word can sound so gentle and hurt so much. I backed away quietly, heart pounding, and went inside before they could see me. I didn't want her to feel guilty. I didn't want him to have to choose. That night, when Anna offered to clean the dishes, I let her. When Mark asked if I wanted to watch a movie with them, I said I was tired. And for the first time, I locked my door before sleeping. Days turned into a quiet kind of routine, the kind where you measure love not by words, but by distance. Emily still came to my room sometimes. She'd sit on the edge of my bed, swinging her little legs, asking me to braid her hair. Those moments saved me. They reminded me that some hearts still see you, even when the rest of the world looks past. Grandma, she said one night, why do you always eat alone? I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because Grandma eats slow, and everyone else eats fast, she giggled. I can eat slow, too. So we sat together, just the two of us, eating cold soup and laughing over nothing. But children grow fast, and they listen, even when you think they don't. A few weeks later, she came to my door looking sad. Mommy said you need to rest more, she said. Oh, she did? Yes, she said sometimes you forget this isn't your house anymore. Her words weren't cruel. They were innocent, like a flower caught in the rain, still beautiful, but bending under a truth it didn't understand. I hugged her tightly, blinking back tears. Your mommy's right, sweetheart. Grandma just forgets sometimes. I stopped cooking after that. The kitchen became her space entirely. I started keeping little snacks in my room, crackers, fruit, tea bags. It's funny how quickly you can shrink your life into one small corner. Sometimes I'd walk past the living room and see them together, laughing, playing, planning trips. I'd stand there quietly, smiling from the doorway, pretending I was just passing by. Once, Anna looked up and caught me watching. She smiled politely again, that same smile from the beginning. The one that said, "Thank you for understanding." Then came the day I found the boxes. They were stacked in the garage, labeled guest room storage. My room used to be called Mom's room. The handwriting was hers. I stared at it for a long time. Not angry, not shocked. Just hollow. Maybe she was just organizing, I told myself. Maybe it meant nothing. But that night, when I came upstairs, I noticed the photo of my husband and me was missing from the hallway. It used to hang by the light switch, the first thing I saw every morning. When I asked about it, Anna said, "Oh, I moved it to keep the wall less cluttered." Her voice was gentle, her eyes kind, but something inside me went very still. A few days later, Mrs. Henderson stopped me during my walk. "You look pale today," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything all right?" I forced a smile. "Just tired, that's all." She frowned. "You tell that son of yours to take better care of you." I laughed softly. "Oh, he's doing his best." She shook her head. Sometimes doing their best just means forgetting who raised them. Her words followed me all the way home. That evening, I sat on my bed and opened one of my husband's old letters again. You can't hold on to people forever. Just hold on to love. I read it twice, then folded it neatly back into the box. The silence in the house grew thicker with each passing week. I stopped joining them for dinner. They stopped asking. Even Emily began to hesitate before knocking on my door. Once, I heard Anna telling a friend on the phone, "It's just complicated. She means well, but I feel like I'm being watched all the time." Watched. That word stayed with me. I'd spent my life watching, not to judge, but to care. Watching over my son when he was sick, over my husband when he was dying, over this home that I thought needed me. Now, watching had become something unwanted. The last spark of warmth between us came on a Thursday evening. Mark brought home a small cake for Emily's birthday. They had friends over, laughter echoing through the house. I stayed upstairs, listening to the sound of children's voices and clinking forks. After everyone left, Emily came running up to my room, face glowing. "Grandma, look. We saved you a piece." She handed me a small plate with a corner of the cake, the frosting smudged but beautiful. I held it carefully like something precious. "Thank you, sweetheart." Anna stood behind her in the doorway, smiling faintly. "We didn't mean to exclude you, Mom. It was just a small thing for the kids." I nodded. "Of course. I understand, and I did. I truly did. But understanding doesn't stop the ache." Later that night, I placed the cake on the nightstand and turned off the light. I didn't eat it. Some part of me wanted to keep it untouched, like proof that I'd once been remembered. The next morning, Anna knocked softly on my door. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Can we talk later today? After Mark gets home?" I looked up from my chair. "Of course," she smiled a small, polite smile. "Thank you." She left, and the door clicked shut. And though she hadn't said it yet, I already knew what that talk would be about. The house was unusually still that evening. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to tick slower, as if it knew what was coming. Mark was late. Anna moved around the kitchen without speaking much. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and rain, the kind of smell that always made me think of endings. When the front door finally opened, Mark's footsteps sounded heavier than usual. "Mom," he called softly, "can we sit for a minute?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel and followed him into the living room. The lamp by the sofa was the only light on, throwing gentle gold across their faces. Anna sat beside him, her fingers laced together tightly in her lap. I already knew. Still, I waited. I wanted to hear the words, even if I already felt them. Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, you know we love you." "People always start with love when they're about to take something away," he went on. "Things have been crowded lately. Emily's getting older, she needs her own space. And Anna's been working from home, so it's been hard to balance everything." I nodded slowly. "I understand. Houses feel smaller when people grow." Anna's voice was soft but steady. "We just think it might be good for you to have a place that's really yours. Somewhere peaceful. You'd have privacy, friends your age, your own kitchen." Her words blurred after that. I heard the shape of them, not the sound. I looked at my son, the boy who once clung to my hand crossing the street, who used to whisper, "Don't go, Mom," when I tucked him in. Now he sat there, eyes lowered, waiting for me to make it easy. I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that hides anger. It was the kind that comes when you've already cried all your tears somewhere no one could see. "I see," I said quietly. "You've both thought this through." Mark reached for my hand. "It's not forever, Mom. Just until things settle." "Of course," I whispered. "Just until things settle." But I knew how rarely things in life ever settle the way we hope. That night I packed. I didn't rush. I folded each blouse, each photograph, each letter as if it still had breath. The rain outside tapped against the window like a clock reminding me to let go. I found my husband's old cardigan and pressed it to my chest. His scent was long gone, but memory has its own fragrance. When I slipped it into the suitcase, I whispered, "Looks like it's just me again, love." Anna knocked gently around midnight. "Mom?" You don't have to do this tonight, she said. We can help tomorrow. I shook my head. No need, dear. I like doing things myself. It keeps my hands from shaking. She hesitated at the door. I hope you're not angry. I met her eyes. No, Anna, I'm not angry. And I wasn't. Not exactly. What I felt was older than anger, quieter. A kind of grief that comes when you realize you've outstayed your story in someone else's chapter. She nodded and left, her steps soft down the hall. When the house went silent again, I opened the small box that held my husband's letters. I took one out at random, the one written on our 25th anniversary. If one day you find yourself alone, remember, you're never just leaving. You're moving toward something new. I read it twice, then slid it into my purse. Maybe he knew, even back then, that I'd need those words one day. Morning arrived gray and damp. Emily burst into my room before anyone could stop her. Grandma! Mommy said you're going on a trip. I froze, then smiled the best I could. That's right, sweetheart. A little trip. She wrapped her arms around my waist. Bring me something pretty when you come back. I will, I promised, knowing I wouldn't. Anna stood in the doorway, her face pale. Mark was behind her carrying one of my suitcases. He tried to smile. We'll visit every week. Don't make promises you'll forget, I said softly. It's all right. Just be happy. He looked like he wanted to say more, but words failed him. They usually do when the heart is split between love and relief. Outside, the sky was the color of old silver. The taxi idled by the curb. I turned once to look at the house. The porch where I'd watched sunsets. The kitchen window where I'd listened to laughter. Anna stood beside Mark, one arm around Emily. I waved. They waved back, no tears. Not then. As the car pulled away, I felt the weight of the suitcase beside me and realized it was lighter than I expected. Maybe because everything truly heavy had to stay behind. The ride to the small apartment Mark had found for me took less than an hour. The driver hummed along to the radio, unaware that a lifetime was unraveling quietly in the back seat. When we stopped, he helped me with the bags and said, "Nice place, ma'am. Fresh start, huh?" I smiled politely. That's what they tell me. The building was plain, but clean. White curtains, a narrow hallway, the faint smell of soap and paint. Inside, I placed the framed wedding photo on the shelf first. The rest could wait. I boiled water for tea, sat on the small couch, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the new heartbeat of this smaller life. It wasn't home. Not yet. But it was something to stand in. That evening, I called Mrs. Henderson. "Well, look who's joining the neighborhood of independence," she said with a laugh. I chuckled weakly. "Seems so. You'll be fine, dear. You've got that strong kind of quiet in you. The world can't take that away." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. Later, as I unpacked, I found Emily's drawing tucked between my clothes, a picture of me, her, and a big red heart. Underneath, she'd written, "Grandma's house forever." I sat down and let the tears finally come, soft, steady, almost grateful. Because even though I had lost a home, I hadn't lost the memory of being loved. When the taxi dropped me off in front of the small apartment building, I stood there for a moment holding my single suitcase, unsure if I should go in or call someone to tell them I had arrived. No one knew I was coming here. It was just me, the building, and a silence so heavy it almost pressed against my chest. The place wasn't much. A small one-bedroom apartment I had found through a kind lady at the church. She said it was quiet, safe, and not too expensive. Quiet. That word had comforted me at first, but as I turned the key and stepped inside, it suddenly felt frightening. Everything echoed, The click of the lock, the squeak of my shoes on the wooden floor, even the soft sigh I let out. There was no smell of food, no sound of laughter, no movement, just still air and the faint hum of a refrigerator someone had left plugged in. I set my suitcase on the floor and sat down beside it. The room was nearly empty except for a small couch, a table, and an old lamp that flickered when I turned it on. For the first time in many years, there was no one waiting for me. No dinner to cook, no bedtime story to tell, no voices calling Mom or Grandma. Just me. And the sound of the rain starting to fall outside. I made myself a cup of instant coffee, the cheap kind that never quite tastes right, and sat by the window. I could see the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. People walked past with umbrellas, heading somewhere warm. I wondered if they had someone waiting for them. I wondered if my son thought about me. That first night, I barely slept. Every sound, a car door, a barking dog, footsteps in the hallway, made me flinch. Not because I was scared, but because it reminded me that I wasn't home anymore. I wasn't part of a family anymore. In the morning, I made a list of things I needed. Bread, milk, a blanket, maybe a radio. The quiet was too loud. I walked to a nearby store and the young cashier smiled at me as if she'd seen me before. Maybe she just pitied me. Old woman alone, buying groceries for one. Still, her small kindness mattered. I smiled back, said thank you, and tried not to let my voice shake. Over the next few days, I unpacked slowly. I folded my clothes neatly, placed my son's old photograph on the bedside table, and hung a small cross by the door. Routine gave me something to hold on to. I woke up early, made tea, watched the sunrise through the window. Sometimes I even talked to myself just to fill the silence. I thought about calling my son, many times. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered his face that last night. The way he avoided my eyes, how he stayed quiet when she told me to leave. That silence had said more than words ever could, so I put the phone down and decided not to call. If he wanted to find me, he knew where to look. After a week, I started walking in the park nearby. There were benches under big oak trees, and children playing on the swings. I liked sitting there watching the world move on without me. It was painful at first, but then it became comforting. Life went on. That was the truth. Life always goes on, whether we're ready or not. One afternoon, I met a woman named Carol. She was around my age, with kind eyes and a scarf wrapped around her neck like she was always cold. She sat beside me on the bench and said, "You come here often, don't you?" I smiled. "Trying to make it a habit," I said. We talked for a while, about weather, her grandchildren, my cooking. I didn't tell her much about my family. Not yet, but when I went home that evening, I felt lighter. It was strange how one small conversation could warm a cold day. Nights were still the hardest. I would sit by the window sipping tea and stare at the stars. Sometimes I'd whisper a prayer for my son. Not to change, not to come back, just to be happy. That's what mothers do, even when their hearts are broken. The loneliness didn't leave. It just settled beside me like an old friend who doesn't talk much. I began to understand that maybe this was how my life would be now. Quieter, smaller, but still mine. And in that realization there was a strange kind of peace. Painful, yes, but peaceful. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about the days when the house was full of noise, when my grandson would run through the hallway, when my daughter-in-law would ask for recipes. I wrote about the way things changed slowly. Little distances, quiet judgments, words that never got said. Writing helped me remember who I was before I became someone's mother-in-law. One morning, there was a knock on my door. It startled me. No one had knocked since I moved in. When I opened it, Carol stood there holding a small box. "I made cookies," she said, smiling. "Thought you might like some company." I almost cried right there at the door. We sat together, eating cookies and drinking tea. She told me about her late husband, how she missed him every day, but still managed to laugh. We didn't talk about family much, but we both understood the same kind of loneliness. That evening, after she left, I realized something. Kindness doesn't always come from family. Sometimes it comes from strangers who see you without asking what went wrong. A few days later, I received a letter. Not from my son, from my neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, the one who used to live next door back at my old house. She wrote to tell me that she missed our Sunday talks, and that the roses I planted by the fence had started to bloom again this year. She said, "It's not the same without you here." I read that line over and over and tears finally came, not because of pain, but because someone remembered me kindly. It's strange how sometimes you need distance to realize what really matters. I had spent years trying to please everyone, trying to stay useful, trying to belong. And in the end, all I really wanted was to be seen. Just seen. That night, I looked around my little apartment, the soft light, the photo by the bed, the smell of cookies still in the air. And for the first time, it didn't feel so empty. It felt like mine. It felt like the start of something small, but whole. Winter came quietly that year. The trees outside my window lost their leaves one by one, and the wind began to sound lonelier somehow. I found comfort in little things: the smell of coffee in the morning, the creak of the floor when I walked to the window, the sound of the mail slot clicking open. Small sounds that reminded me I was still here. Every morning I would water the small plant Carol had given me. She said it was easy to care for. Just a little sunlight, a little patience. Sometimes when I touched its leaves, I thought about my son. How I had spent my whole life giving sunlight and patience, never asking much in return. But love isn't a trade, is it? It's something we give because we don't know how not to. There were days when I felt fine, truly fine. I would read, cook soup, and even hum a tune I used to sing to my grandson when he was little. And then there were days when the quiet felt heavier than ever. On those days, I would look out the window and wonder if they ever thought about me, if the house still smelled of my cooking, if the little one remembered my stories. Sometimes I caught myself whispering, "Did I do something wrong?" I'd ask that question to the empty room over and over. But no one ever answered, and maybe that was the answer itself. One evening, a package arrived at my door. No name on it, just my address. Inside was a small framed picture. It was my grandson, at his last school recital. There was no note, no explanation, just the photo. I held it in my hands for a long time, tracing his smile with my thumb. It was as if someone knew I needed to see that face again. That night, I sat at the table and cried for the first time in months. Not from anger, just release. The tears came softly, like rain on a quiet night, until there were none left. When I finally looked up, the room looked the same. But something inside me had shifted. It was as if, for the first time, I wasn't holding on to the hurt anymore. I was letting it pass through me. The next day, I decided to write a letter to my son. Not to accuse. Not to explain. Just to say what I had never said properly. Dear Michael, I hope you and the family are doing well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I don't want you to worry about me. I'm okay. I have a small place now. It's quiet, but it's mine. I've made a few new friends and I try to keep myself busy. I want you to know that I don't blame you. Life has a way of getting complicated. Sometimes people say things they don't mean, or stay quiet when they should speak. I know that better than anyone now. Please tell little Andrew that Grandma loves him. Always. Maybe one day, when he's older, he'll understand that love doesn't fade just because distance grows. Take care of each other. That's all I ever wanted. Love, Mom. I folded it neatly, sealed it, and placed it on the counter. It stayed there for 3 days before I finally mailed it. As I dropped it into the mailbox, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. It felt like setting a bird free. Weeks passed, and there was no reply. And yet I didn't feel disappointed. I think deep down I knew he had received it. Maybe he read it late at night when everyone else was asleep. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he cried a little too. That thought was enough for me. Sometimes peace doesn't come from answers. It comes from finally stopping the questions. One Sunday, I joined Carol for church. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, not as a gift to others, but as something you give yourself when you're ready to stop hurting. I sat there quietly, my hands folded in my lap, and thought about all the years I spent trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect guest, the perfect peacekeeper. I realized how much of myself I had given away just to belong. When the service ended, Carol touched my hand and smiled. "Feel lighter?" she asked. I nodded. "A little," I said. But in truth, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness. One night, not long after, I dreamed of my son. In the dream, we were sitting at the kitchen table again. He was young, smiling, eating the apple pie I used to make every Thanksgiving. He looked up at me and said, "It's good, Mom." And that was it. When I woke up, tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't sad ones. It felt like a goodbye I didn't get to have in real life. The next morning, I baked that same pie. The apartment smelled warm, familiar, like home. I set a slice on the table beside the framed photo of my grandson and whispered, "This one's for you." And in that small act, baking a pie, whispering to an empty chair, I found my peace. It wasn't the ending I dreamed of, but it was an ending that belonged to me. As the days grew longer again, I began to see beauty in small moments. The way sunlight touched the curtain in the morning. The way the old radio crackled when it played a song I loved. The way the plant by the window reached for the light. Life wasn't grand anymore, but it was still life. Sometimes I think about that night, the night she told me to leave. I remember how quiet the house was when I closed the door behind me. Back then, I thought it was the end of everything. But now I see it differently. It was the beginning of learning how to stand on my own, even when my heart felt too heavy to carry. If I could tell her anything now, my daughter-in-law, I would say this: I don't hate you. I hope you're kind to yourself. I hope you never have to feel what I felt, but if you do, I hope someone is there to hold your hand. Because bitterness would only make me smaller, and I've learned that letting go, even of pain, takes strength too. The seasons turned again. Spring came back with soft rains and blooming trees. One morning, I opened the window, breathed in the fresh air, and whispered, "I'm okay now." And for once, I meant it. Maybe my story doesn't have a happy ending. Maybe it just has an honest one. But there's something beautiful about that too, about surviving heartbreak and still finding gentle ways to live. I still think about my son sometimes. I still wonder if he ever looks back. But I no longer wait by the phone. Instead, I look out at the world, at children laughing, neighbors waving, birds finding their way home, and I smile. Because somewhere, in some quiet way, I found my way home too. I've come to believe that silence can teach us more than words ever could. In the quiet of these past months, I have heard the truth about love, loss, and what it really means to let go. There was a time when I thought love meant holding on, fighting to stay, trying to fix, waiting for someone to understand. But now I see it differently. Sometimes love is stepping away with grace, even when your heart is breaking. When my daughter-in-law told me to leave that night, I thought it was the worst moment of my life. And maybe in a way it was. But as the days turned into months, I began to see something I couldn't then. That sometimes life pulls us apart so we can learn who we are on our own. I had spent so many years being someone's mother, someone's helper, someone's shadow. It took losing my place in that house to finally find my place in myself. I still remember the look in her eyes that evening. There wasn't hate there, just exhaustion, maybe a bit of fear. Two women from different worlds, both trying to protect what they loved. If I could go back, I wouldn't argue. I'd simply say, I understand, and I forgive you. Because now I know, carrying anger only makes the road heavier, and I've walked long enough with that weight. Forgiveness doesn't always come with a hug or a phone call. Sometimes it's just a quiet whisper to yourself. I release this. I release them. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means remembering without pain, and that, I think, is its own kind of peace. These days, my mornings are simple. I wake up to the sound of birds outside my window. I make tea, write in my journal, and sometimes I even talk to the photo of my grandson. He's growing up somewhere out there, learning, laughing, living his own small adventures. I hope, when he's older, he'll wonder about me and maybe even come looking. But if he doesn't, that's all right too. Love doesn't vanish just because it's unseen. It lives quietly in the spaces between memory and hope. Every once in a while, I'll hear a knock at the door, and for a second, my heart skips. I still have that reflex, but it's never them. It's usually Carol, or the mailman, or a kind neighbor with soup. And every time I open that door, I remind myself, love still finds its way to me, just in different shapes now. There are moments when I sit by the window and think about all the women who might be feeling what I once felt. That ache of being left behind, of feeling unseen in the very home they helped build. If they could hear me now, I would tell them this: you are still needed, even if your kitchen is quiet. Even if no one calls you mom anymore. Even if the world seems to have moved on without you. Your worth doesn't fade when people stop noticing it. It's stitched into every meal you ever cooked, every tear you ever wiped, every bit of love you ever gave. We spend so much of our lives caring for others that we forget to care for ourselves. But there's still time. There's always time to start again. Even if starting again just means learning to be okay with your own company. Sometimes when the sun sets, I imagine what it would be like to walk through my son's front door again, just once. Maybe I'd find them at the dinner table laughing the way families do. Maybe my grandson would run to me with open arms. Maybe she'd offer me a seat and we'd talk, not about the past, but about the present. But I don't dwell on that picture too long. I let it live in my imagination, soft and untouchable, like a painting you admire from afar. Because the truth is, not every story needs a reunion to have meaning. Some endings are meant to be gentle, like a candle slowly burning out, its light still warm even as it fades. One afternoon, I found myself standing by the mirror, looking at the lines on my face. For years, I used to see them as signs of age, of loss, of things gone by. Now I see them as proof that I have lived, loved, and survived. Every wrinkle holds a story, every gray strand a memory, and I think that's beautiful in its own quiet way. We live so much of our lives wanting to be seen, but the greatest peace comes when we finally learn to see ourselves, not through someone else's eyes, but through the softness of our own understanding. Sometimes I still whisper to the empty room, I forgive you. I'm not sure if I mean my daughter-in-law, my son, or myself anymore. Maybe all three, because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a one-time act. It's a daily choice, like opening the window every morning and letting light in, even when yesterday's sky was gray. And in that light, I keep going. I water my plant. I bake small pies. I smile at strangers. And I live quietly, but fully. There's no grand ending, no dramatic return. Just a woman who once lost everything she thought she needed, and somehow found peace in the spaces that were left behind. If you were sitting across from me now, listening to this story, I'd tell you one last thing. Something I've learned through all the pain and all the quiet. Home isn't always a place or a family or a name on a mailbox. Sometimes, home is the small peace you build within yourself after the storm has passed. Sometimes, home is the strength it takes to say, I'm okay now. And sometimes, home is simply knowing that even if the people you love forget you for a while, your love for them will never forget its way back. So when I look out the window tonight, I don't see the darkness of what I lost anymore. I see the faint glow of a new kind of light, one that belongs only to me. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing truly is. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Every word means more than you know. And if you'd like to support the channel and help me bring you more stories like this one, you can send a super thanks right there in the comments. Your kindness keeps these stories alive, and your love helps me share even more voices that deserve to be heard.